This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and if laziness was an Olympic sport, I'd come in fourth, so I wouldn't have to walk up for a medal. My co-host is John Pasden, and he recently realized that he suffers from a chronic mental illness, which makes him believe that people will change their minds if he presents them with well-informed arguments supported by convincing evidence and observable facts. Me too, buddy. Me too. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you from Utah here in the United States.
Hi listeners, my name is John Pasden. I am in Shanghai, China.
Listeners, eh? Chinese learners, I say.
Learners and listeners. We're going to talk about all kinds of activities they might be up to.
All right, John, before we get into our topic today, we had a review that I wanted to read. This is from Jennifer Burke.
All right.
And this is specifically about Mandarin Companion. She said, I wish I had these books 10 years ago. Now I'm learning Chinese again. I'm thrilled to find these books. I love the vocab lists and the grammar for each chapter. I love the map of China and a list of characters and how the cast of characters are underlined. The only thing I would perhaps add would be tone marks above the characters. I can't wait to read them all. Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. I'm glad to hear that you're getting a lot of help out of the graded readers.
Yeah, thanks. And I have a little bit of advice for you. The tone marks above the characters, I would add them in yourself with a pencil lightly, and only the ones where you think you really need them. And then later on, you can erase them when you don't need them anymore.
Ooh, that's a pro tip right there. All right, John. So leading to our topics today, I came across a story on Reddit. It's in our language learning subreddit. And I thought this was kind of a cute story. So I want to share this one with you first.
All right.
So I believe she's French and her partner is Chinese. And their common language they speak is English. But evidently, as she says, he wanted to surprise me by learning Chinese. It's sweet and it turns out to be hilarious. She says that he went on to study Chinese for 300 days on Duolingo. And she says this, making yourself feel like you've learned something is far away from learning something for real. And that's exactly what happened to him. So evidently, last week, he proudly revealed his surprise. And it was even poetic when he said, quote, the cheesecake is grieving, and something like the purple elephant eats passion for breakfast with a come from nowhere confidence. So she didn't actually put the Chinese, but evidently that's kind of what he said in Chinese. She says, I was torn between laughing and holding myself back while being genuinely touched that he dedicated almost a year to this effort.
Wait, hold on. Was he learning Chinese or was he learning French?
Yes, Chinese. So evidently she's providing the English translation of what he said in Chinese, which evidently was the cheesecake is grieving and the purple elephant eats passion for breakfast. So, okay.
Okay.
She goes on to say, when I gently suggested he might want to try a more comprehensive learning method, he got a bit defensive. Apparently, he's very committed to his daily streak, and the gamification aspect is one of the few things keeping him motivated. After all, it's lovely, and I hope he'll find his own way that's engaging and helpful to form coherent thoughts.
Well, he has learned something. No, I was connecting with the whole French angle because I used Duolingo to learn some French, but I didn't get that far because it wasn't working for me. But that was some years ago.
It's got a lot of people at least trying to learn.
All right. So this is a guy who was quite dedicated to learning Chinese, but only in one way, only through Duolingo. So what we're talking about today is learning Chinese and going to certain extremes in the way that we're studying. For example, only using one method.
And you may be guilty of this, fellow Chinese learner. I think all of us have gone through maybe different stages, but we are going to really dive into this. And we have identified 7, yes, that's right, 7 types of extremes that we have seen people using to learn the language. And there are definitely going to be some benefits of some of these. There are also drawbacks. We're going to talk about some of this, and maybe you might relate to some.
Yeah, and I think we will relate to some of them ourselves. I think some of us have gone through certain phases maybe where you're going a little extreme in one area, but then eventually you even it out. But anyway, we'll go through them all. Okay, so the first one is consuming media, such as, watching TV, movies, YouTube, maybe listening to music.
Yeah, so it's this concept of, hey, I just got to get all the input. Even if I don't understand any of it, hey, this is helping me. It's making some sort of progress.
Right. And so you can imagine just doing this for a really long time and not doing anything else and maybe not making as much progress as you had hoped.
I guess I would say, John, once again, as we get into these extremes, something's better than nothing, right? Generally, yes.
Yes, for sure.
But I think, this kind of method, if you are starting at zero or you are like very, very low, if you aren't having any comprehension, there's no other, I guess, indicators or something there to hang your hat on to get a grip on maybe what's happening, what's going on. The opportunity for you to learn this way is going to be, I would just say the effectiveness of learning this way is not going to be very high.
All right, but then let's look at the other extreme too. If you never ever try to watch a movie, a TV show, even a natural video clip in Chinese, then, why not? It's good to try it every now and then. Sometimes you'll have wonderful little discoveries. You realize you understand more than you thought. Or maybe you'll be a little bit overconfident and you'll burst your bubble just a little bit. But in any case, it's good to get more exposure.
Yeah, you're not wrong there.
What an endorsement. Thank you, Jared.
So I think overall, this can be helpful, but really what I've seen, John, and I guess my personal take is like, if you at least have some level of comprehension of what you're watching, the effectiveness of doing this increases.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's go to the next one. The next one we've talked about in other podcasts, but it's specifically flashcards or maybe other vocabulary learning methods. But flashcards, now that there's like these spaced repetition systems, different kinds of electronic flashcards, it can be quite engrossing and some people take it really far.
Yes, this is true. There are, because flashcard addicts, if you will, they're just, hey, I got to spend, a couple hours, or they're just, cruising those flashcards as soon as possible, or they're just cruising those flashcards any moment they have available.
I remember, Jared, some years ago, I had a client at All Set Learning, and she was here in Shanghai, and she was trying to improve her Chinese. She was doing Chinese lessons. But the thing is, aside from her Chinese lessons, the main thing she did to practice her Chinese in China was to do Skritter. And Skritter's great, but she would literally do it for hours every day and not go outside and talk to people when she was in China.
Yeah, that's a missed opportunity for sure.
Yeah, for her, it was like she needed the spaced repetition so that she didn't forget what she had learned, and she'd kind of externalized her memory into Skritter, and then she felt like if she didn't keep reviewing it every day, she was going to lose all that hard work. But I was like, come on, you're in China. But it was really hard to get through to her. It was quite an interesting and kind of unfortunate situation.
Well, I have to say, Skritter, if anyone doesn't know, that it's specifically a app website to help you practice your handwriting of Chinese characters. And yeah, she's right. If she didn't keep that up, she's going to lose that handwriting because it takes a lot of practice, a lot of time to really, get good at handwriting. But that's a different skill aside from learning the characters and learning to read and practicing the language, right?
Yeah, and where I've seen this kind of flashcard repetition used to the best effect is when you're not in China and you review. And then when you do go to China, you're able to recall this vocabulary and actually use it. Then you feel like, all that flashcard review is paying off.
And, I'll rehash a little, some things we've talked about in the past, John. Yeah, but, generally, flashcards, research shows that, it is actually quite effective in helping you recall that word. And then in Chinese, of course, that character and its meaning. But the problem with flashcards is that you often are learning them in isolation. So you're learning just that character and you're not having that mentally connected with other words. And I shouldn't say just character because, there could be 2 or 3 character words on your flashcard. But oftentimes, once again, this is learned in isolation and it's not learned in context. And what we do know is contextual learning, when you're using that word in a conversation or you're reading it in a graded reader, like Mandarin Companion. So those can be highly effective in really not just saying, oh, I can recall that word, but actually retrieving that meaning and using it in meaningful, purposeful conversation and being able to actually speak with ideas as opposed to thinking word by word.
Oh, and actually, we have another example of a learner who took flashcards to an extreme and got kind of burned by it. You remember, Jared?
Yes. So Jonathan Coveney. So we had him on the podcast. You know him, John.
Yep.
He's a great guy. Jonathan's awesome. He's like, man, a high achiever guy. But it's episode 89 of it says vocab, apps, and learner engagement. Anyway, but like Jonathan, he talks about his experience and he says, he went like overboard on flashcards. He said how you do literally hours a day and he learned thousands of characters for sure. But he said it like it gave him PTSD. Now he's definitely an extreme case, but he said it even like kind of put him off from deciding to try to, learn another language when he was in, I think it might have even been French or something he wanted to learn, but he was like, oh man, I just can't go through that again. And he recognizes, what he did to get to his level of fluency, why for him it was effective. And he didn't do just only flashcards, but that specific aspect of it kind of turned him off from wanting to learn any other languages.
Yikes.
Yeah. But he's a great guy. And Jonathan, you're out there. It'd be good to get your take on this. And you can, if you go back and listen to that other episode, we'll put it in the show notes.
But Jared, on the flip side, I think there are people that never use flashcards and they're just like, well, I'll just go out and use the language. But then, maybe they're not taking any kind of notes. They're learning words and forgetting them instantly. So I think there is definitely a case to be made for occasional flashcard review. And I think could use them more. I have used them to good effect in the past, but not so much recently.
You're right. It's one of the things we're not saying, hey, no, never do this. This is bad, right? It's in moderation and balance. And we'll get to that. We'll give a quick plug to Hack Chinese. They've got a great program. They've got a great website, built around flashcards. Definitely a more robust thing. So that's definitely worth a look.
Okay, so the next one, number 3, this is related to output, whether it's speaking or writing. You sometimes see people who are really focused on just speaking, or maybe just writing all the time. And, it's good to speak more. And that's something that a lot of people don't do enough of. And some people maybe don't write much either. So it's nice to see people doing that too. But going really overboard tends to result in a very unbalanced result.
So, John, I think in this one, we were talking about like maybe just speaking or just writing. So I guess just output in kind of one form, right?
Right. Not rapidly vacillating between the two. That would be weird.
Yeah. So this definitely can be problematic. Definitely we can talk about like the speaking thing. Well, I guess we've seen both examples, right? But I do know people where, hey, it's like, hey, I'm only going to focus on like speaking Chinese. The writing, the characters is just too hard. So it's just not worth my time. And I'm going to only do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when I first came to China and I realized that I really needed a lot more speaking practice. When I remember that time, I remember myself just forcing myself to go out and speak a lot. And I think like, oh, was I speaking too much? But no, I absolutely wasn't. I was spending a lot of time studying, like using my dictionary, going over my notes and my textbook. And it has to be a lot of speaking for it to be too much speaking. But I have actually run into some people like this who never seem to study. And all they do is just talk, and they just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. They don't like take time to reflect and like kind of absorb what they're learning and, what they need to focus on.
Yeah, I definitely think there's that aspect of it. And I think also if you're ignoring the written language, I always put it this way. If, hey, you say you're going to learn Chinese, but you're not going to learn the written language. Now, okay, if your ambitions are just, hey, some crash course Chinese, because you want to go travel to China in a couple of months, and you just want to be able to have some basic stuff to get around. Okay, I get that. But like, if you really want to learn the language, just think about this. You're going to be illiterate. And how far does illiteracy get you in today's society? Not very far. And it's definitely going to constrain your opportunities and your ability to interact with people if you're only going to focus on speaking and ignoring the written language.
So for writing, I think it's pretty rare for someone to really focus only on writing. But actually, I had a period of my own studies when I was really focused on writing because I wanted to do my master's in applied linguistics in Chinese. And so I had to pass the written entrance exam that showed that I had the undergraduate knowledge of linguistics for the program. And so I knew I had to study like a bunch of stuff in Chinese, linguistics related to modern Mandarin. And then I had to be able to write about it. And my writing just wasn't that good at the beginning. So I just had to get a lot better. And so I had to do a lot of practice. Even though I was doing a lot of writing at that time, I remember, I think what stuck with me the most was I had a tutor and I would have some homework where I had to write something and then she would go through it with me. And so we'd be talking about everything. And then being able to talk about what I had written after I had written it, clarifying, learning all the language related to editing. It was a really nice compliment for the writing. But even though it wasn't only writing, it was a lot of writing. But for me, I could only stand that because I only had to do it long enough to pass the test. And then after I passed the test, I never wrote that much Chinese again.
Yeah. I remember one guest he had reams of notebooks he filled up with characters. And then he had I think pencils that he had used to write, and they would kind of whittle down, you sharpen it to it's like a little stub. And then he put the stubs on the wall as kind of like little trophies every time he, oh, look, I used this whole pencil, right? And I remember as we were talking about it, he looked back and realized, hey, that was not necessarily the most effective thing. And I think, John, we're kind of squishing a few things right into the speaking, only writing thing, because not just focusing on the handwriting thing and only doing that. There are some people which will be like, hey, I'll only type, right? But they're not, don't want to speak or whatever. And I got to say that I've heard these stories a little bit more with some, I would say, old timers now who were learning back in the 80s, 90s, because they just didn't have opportunities. There just weren't people to talk to. And so their learning was very confined to the written language. And so when they finally had an opportunity to go to China, they were kind of like, they were really hard for them to speak because they just didn't have the practice.
Yeah. So for this one, I think the opposite extreme is probably maybe more common, especially if you're not in China. So are you having the issue of never being able to really practice speaking? Because if you want to get fluent someday, you got to start at some point. Or are you the person who's like, I don't need to write, I'll just type. But then you never, ever try to write at all? Because I think that's kind of a shame too.
Yeah. So there you go. Two extremes, kind of almost three-ish in there. Three extremes there to avoid within that. Only speaking, only writing. Well, number 4, this one is grammar and accuracy. So, John, I know grammar.
Ooh, love it.
You love it, man. You go to sleep, your pillow's like a grammar Chinese dictionary, something, right?
I mean, I have been quite obsessed with grammar in the past. Yes, guilty as charged.
But I think in this one is, grammar purism. This concept of, hey, people like memorizing every pattern before using it. This harkens back to some very traditional language learning methods. It just is kind of the grammar instruction. You got to understand the grammar, how the language is structured in order to use it.
Yeah, I remember when I was in grad school, I was thinking, I really need to totally learn le. Le is so hard. I need to just crack down and learn every single rule. And then I could be like, I finally learned it. But what I learned in grad school, which kind of blew my mind and changed my perspective totally, was that in different regions of China, native speakers have different opinions on what's right and wrong in certain edge cases with le. So what I learned is that ultimately there is no completely black and white set of rules that you can follow. So that, for me, allowed me to relax a bit with le and just kind of, expose myself to more and more examples of it and just get used to it rather than learning rules.
One of my favorite examples in this area is Steve Kaufman. He's kind of internet famous, the linguist. He's kind of the guy behind LinkQ. But we had him on the episode 15, Steve Kaufman, the linguist interview. And, he speaks about 20 languages, like legit. He's about 12, he said. He's really conversational in. But, his general approach is something that we really advocate is that, hey, he doesn't really study grammar. It's just he kind of picks it up along the way. Now, John, I shouldn't say again, don't study grammar ever, right? But
that would be the opposite extreme, Jared.
Exactly. Grammar nihilism, right? That's the opposite. But the point being is that grammar is essentially their patterns. They're patterns in language. And our brains are very good at recognizing and understanding patterns and picking them up. That typically happens through repetition. And so the more that we see grammar in context and we're encountering it, that's when it really kind of gets stuck in our brain. If we're sitting there memorizing rules, that learning is kind of abstract. And grammar is something you kind of need to know, and it's going to be inherently kind of understood in the moment. You don't have time when you are speaking to think, okay, now how do I use this grammar pattern? I mean, you can take the time, but it slows down and impedes your conversational, progress, so to speak, or conversational flow. So grammar is kind of patterns. So yeah, some basic instruction I think is good, but it's also great to encounter those grammar structures in natural language and then also later on study and review for clarification when you are maybe confused or didn't quite understand.
Yeah, for a lot of people, like maybe they'll get to the intermediate level or something and they'll feel like they don't really need grammar. But then there'll be certain questions that'll just start to bother them. It's like, do you say this or do you say that? Which one is right? Like, why don't they understand me when I say this? How would I say that? And then once you have these questions and they bother you, then it's time to look it up. And then
Mhm.
your brain is totally primed to learn the rules and to actually make use of them rather than like constricting you.
Because I think at that point, you got a whole lot more context. Context being like little hooks where you can hang those rules on and you kind of start to make sense of it.
Yeah, I remember a few times I would look up some rule and I'd be like, that can't be right. That's not true. And then you realize, oh, it is true. And if you never looked it up, you wouldn't have realized because it's hard to notice everything, you know? Okay, so the next one is number 5, and that would be structured course versus like learner autonomy, self-direction.
Oh, yes, this is a good one. So think about this. You have a course, a textbook, something like that, and you're just focused on that, and that's it.
Yeah, let's be honest, Jared, it's probably HSK.
That's a very prominent one. Of course, there's people who can have whatever textbook. There's a lots of them out there. But hey, you staying on this. And John, this reminds me of a question I think that once was raised, that we even discussed this, I think at one point, was like, if you were to just study the textbook, is that enough for you to become fluent, so to speak, or even conversational in the language?
Well, it's certainly a starting point,
I agree.
but it's not going to be able to cover the needs of every learner. I think it's going to cover the needs of a single learner, but it's a good starting point. Yeah.
That's right. So, we thinking about this is that, some people we can get over reliant, like on that specific program, or, sometimes on our teacher. And I think, one thing is sometimes people, waiting for permission even to move forward, or I can't go and I actually had someone once suggesting, they were ready to read one of our Mandarin Companion graded readers. And they're kind of, oh, no, I need to stay focused on this next chapter. And I was kind of like, yeah, I get that, but this is going to help be like the glue. It's going to connect everything. It's going to make a lot of more sense. You're going to make some real fast progress. And like, no, I really need to stay, on track with my course. And I'm just like, oh man.
But Jared, there's also the opposite extreme, which is like being really focused on one area and kind of neglecting everything. I remember I've had quite a few clients over the years. They want to study business Chinese, and that makes sense. But I've had one or two who want to study business Chinese from the very beginning.
Mm.
And they're like, I don't want to waste time on, ordering coffee or whatever. They're like, I just want to study business. And it's like, well, coffee is in the office too. Coffee is in meetings. Like when you're at the very beginning level, all of that is also business Chinese. So you don't want to focus too intensely on just one aspect. You do want to have a little bit of breadth to your knowledge and your experience with the language.
And no good business person, and this could be applied in so many different aspects, is just going to like come to a meeting, like, or someone you're trying to sales or business deal or whatever, and sit down and you're just like, all right, we're going to go right to business. None of like get to know anybody or anything, not that's,
let's talk profit.
That's right. Let's do strategy. No, if you don't build some sort of relationship, you're probably not going to get the trust needed to pull off whatever it is you're trying to do.
In fact, some of my clients who've had the best Chinese and they're learning Chinese for business purposes, they want to be able to talk about like family with their clients and non-business stuff so that they can have like a deeper relationship with their clients. So it's kind of funny how that works out.
It's a big deal, man. Next one, number 6. Intensity versus sustainability. So this is people just get really intense. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be focused on maybe just one method. Maybe they're doing all sorts of stuff, right? But I think, John, like you put this concept here of a boot camp burnout, 8-hour study days for a month, and then you burn out.
Of course you do.
Definitely have seen this. Now, there are people, that they're joining some sort of program. Maybe it's not boot camp, but maybe they're going to China on a study abroad thing or whatever. And they're pretty intense programs. And, they've done well. But I've also known people where it's been a big challenge. We recently had on the podcast, it's episode 163, was Burnout Breakthrough and Fluency, Shanice's story. So we had Shanice Chen on the podcast. She posts a lot of Chinese learning stuff on Instagram, but she specifically talks about this, how she got into a real intensive program in I think, Chinese university in China. And I think she started at zero, and it was just all Chinese all the time. And after like that first semester, I mean, she almost had some burnout. She went through a really dark period and had a really rough time.
Right. So you want to devote yourself to something you're serious about. You want to do a good job and put in enough time, but you got to stay mentally healthy.
And that's right. And I think she was pretty open and talking about her experience. But I just kind of retrospect thinking about it too, is that if you have enough support around you, and like you said, don't want to neglect your mental health and making sure other needs are taken care of as well, you can do that. That can be sustainable. The 8-hour study day. I also think of people who are studying to be diplomat for the United States Foreign Service Department.
Mm-hmm.
They'll work to go study at the Foreign Language Institute for 8 hours a day. And that's their job. So they'll go do that 8 hours a day, and they'll maybe do some study at night. But, they've usually got a whole bunch of other support systems around them. So that's not like they're just thrown off by themselves.
And it's a limited duration. I mean, it's not forever.
Yeah. The Chinese thing would be a year and a half. They'll learn the Chinese before they're posted, which, I mean, and it's intense. It is intense.
It's pretty long. But
it's good. And like I said, support, and it's balanced.
So then the other end of this spectrum would just be that you're barely studying. You're just doing a little bit here and there so you don't forget it completely. Hopefully listening to this podcast is not the only thing you're doing for your Chinese, because you're not learning a whole lot of actual Chinese on this podcast.
That's true.
Okay, and then the last one, number 7. This one is tech. Now, we know you've got some great apps that help you learn Chinese, but if you're just using that one app or maybe those 2 apps and that's everything, there's probably some other aspects of the language that you're neglecting.
Absolutely. And I think very well illustrated by the story we started out with, right? This guy who's learning Chinese in secret from his partner, 300 days, and he came out talking about the moly cheese or something.
Actually, I want to give a little example from my own studies to help illustrate this. And so, I live in China. I've been studying Italian for a bit over a year now. I've been to Italy twice now. And I'm using basically 3 methods, even though I'm not really able to practice speaking to any native speakers. So one of them is Duolingo. Just go and study with that every day. Another one is using ChatGPT to ask all my grammar questions. And because I studied Spanish to a high level, ChatGPT knows that and will bring in Spanish, relevant grammar and stuff. So that helps a lot.
Nice.
Because ChatGPT doesn't have the grammar explanations. And then number 3 is I'm watching a TV show called Inspector Montalbano, and I'm hearing lots of Italian. And even though I'm not really studying it, I'm not seeing the Italian vocabulary or like getting a transcript or anything. I'm actually understanding more and more. And it's quite exciting because just the extended, exposure in these different forms is actually really working.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you're getting a bit of a balanced approach there, as
Yeah.
opposed to only Duolingo.
So if you're using Duolingo for Chinese, please add some other stuff. You can use ChatGPT. You can use the Chinese Grammar Wiki if you need some more grammar help. Having a tutor is great. Obviously, if you're learning Chinese, you don't want to neglect your pronunciation, your tones.
And I think this is great, John. And I think what I'd like to also kind of highlight here is sometimes, we brought up Duolingo here. It's kind of a little, sometimes the whipping boy, right? Where we're just saying, Duolingo is bad. Well, I wouldn't say it's bad, but in and of itself, by itself, it's insufficient, right? And so this leads to one of the concepts of one of our favorite academics in language learning, Paul Nation. This guy's kind of the grandfather of modern vocabulary acquisition. But we did talk about what we're going to talk about here on a previous podcast many years ago. He has this concept of the 4 strands. And so these 4 strands being like these 4 main things of like language learning. If you approach it from this aspect and give each one kind of equal weight, you're going to have a much better fluency development in the language that you're learning.
Yeah, he does it in the context of like a language learning course, but you can also apply it to your individual studies.
And we're not going to like go into depth on this, but I'll just mention the four of them here. So there's one is the meaning focused input. So it's like, listening and reading language you're mostly familiar with, just kind of focusing on understanding. The second one, meaning focused output, is just you need some sort of practice in speaking and writing using the language that you're familiar with, and perhaps in some conversive manner or something else, you're writing about.
And remember, writing could mean typing.
Correct. 3, language-focused learning. So this is explicitly learning about the language. So this would be, you're studying, you're going through your textbook or a course or flashcards, all that type, grammar study, all that. And then 4th, fluency development. So this is just any activity when you're encountering nothing or almost anything that you aren't familiar with. So like using what you know. And his concept behind this, and there's a lot of, educators that really, support this concept, is that you should give each 4 of these equal emphasis and time in your language learning efforts.
Right. So if you can hit all 4, you're going to be nice and balanced. You won't have those nasty extremes, and you will reap the benefits and make good progress.
And because that's what you want at the end of the day, right? Progress?
I hope so.
I always think about that, John. There's all these courses out there. Learn Chinese in 3 weeks. You'll be fluent by tomorrow night.
3 weeks. All you need is like 2 hours, right?
2 hours times this is 1,000 days. I don't know.
Yeah, so you're in it for the long haul. Don't burn out, and give your studies a little more balance. Hopefully, you've been able to think about your own studies, and if you're hitting any of these extremes too much.
That's right. So go out there and keep doing it. Just don't get too extreme.
You can learn Chinese.
Extremely.
Not extremely. That was the whole point of the podcast.
You know what I mean, John.
Were you even paying attention?
Kind of.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. I'm Jared Turner, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, alongside my co-host John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. Do you have a Chinese learning story to share? We want to hear it. Head over to our website. You can apply to be featured on this show. If you like today's episode, hit that subscribe button. Share it with a friend. It's the best way to help more Chinese learners just like you. You can leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love hearing from you, or come connect with us at MandarinCompanion.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter for more tips, updates, and good times. Want a fun way to boost your Chinese? Grab a Mandarin Companion Graded Reader, available on Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play, or wherever you get your books. Apologies to John Cena. We just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and is edited by Jasper Chua. And of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pass. See you next time.